Thank you for joining us today on Earthfile. I'm Ayola Kasim. For some, a quick glance at their computers confirms it. We have been breaking temperature records for many months this year. October was the 5th month in a row of record warm global temperatures. We now face nearly 3 degrees Celsius warming with our relentless emissions cut. The latest United Nations report says the Emissions Gap Report, an annual assessment by United Nations Environment Programme that measures the difference between government pledges to combat climate change and the emissions reduction scientists say are necessary to avert planetary catastrophe, found that current policies are leading to between 2.5 degrees Celsius and 2.9 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial levels by 2100. Today we will unpack this on the program. Just stay with us. Heavy rains that caused massive losses across Nigeria this year. But after this comes the sweltering heat. Daily, the planet is showing signs of the danger we face, from Europe to the Americas, Asia to Africa. The pink hue of Western Senegal's Lac Rosé once drew thousands of tourists from all over the world to its salt-laden shores. But today, a new wide channel spews brownish green water into the lake whose shore is dotted with dead fish. Pape Siraba and a dozen other salt farmers bag up what may well be their last harvest after extreme floods contaminated the lake and turned its famous waters green, threatening thousands who depend on it for their livelihoods.
Since the water channel was dug, we have lost a lot of money that we don't even think we can recover. This is the first time we've seen so much water coming here. We have witnessed many rainy seasons, but what is happening this year is unprecedented.
Officially known as Retba, the lake's high salinity and rare microbiome long fostered an algae that turned it pinkish in the right season, making it one of the world's most visited attractions and under consideration as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Everything changed last September when torrential rains hit the nearby capital Dakar and swept floodwaters towards the lake, tearing a wide channel in its bank. The deluge washed away countless carefully tended salt mounds and submerged tourist businesses on the shoreline.
When we used to swim, when the salinity level was high, we used to float on the surface. And swimming had therapeutic virtues because it cured diseases. But what amazed people was to know how a person can float on the surface of pink water. That's what excited people. Nowadays, we can't see that anymore.
Qui ont une coloration rose et tu auras de belles images. C'est ce qui excitait les gens venir découvrir le lac. Actuellement, on n'en a plus.
The flooding destroyed 7,000 tons of salt worth around $1.7 million, according to the Salt Extractors Association.
Mais ces quantités d'eau ont plusieurs origines. Il y a une origine naturelle, c'est lié à des eaux.
These quantities of water have several origins. A natural origin with rainwater. But there's also this aspect which pushes some to think that the Pink Lake can be a retention basin. It is to sign the death warrant of the Pink Lake. Because I remind you, the elements which live there and which are responsible for the pink color are linked to this environment, which is extreme. If the environment is diluted, these elements will disappear. Secondly, the salt, which is exploited in the Pink Lake, is linked to the saturation of this lake. If the lake is diluted, the salt water will disappear. Even during this rainy season, you see that all the salt dunes have been dissolved.
Ba now fears the changed composition of the lake will make further harvest impossible. The salt farmers are just some of the 3,000 people who live off the lake. Boatmen and souvenir sellers also fear for the future if the waters remain the current unremarkable hue. It's peak tourist season in Senegal, but he and others have been waiting in vain beside their pink flat-bottomed boats. The ongoing influx of sediment-heavy water would permanently change the lake's unusual ecosystem.
Do you see the orange banner? That was my store. All these stores that you see have been flooded by water.
The flood waters are slowly receding around the souvenir and crafts market at the lake, but vendors are still worried.
Even if this water decreases, it will not decrease 100%. The water is gradually receding. The little you see here, we did it ourselves. We can't do like the street vendors. For the moment, we really don't have hope that this place will be like it was before.
And there is a warning that there is no relief coming soon. The new United Nations gas emissions report does little to inspire hope that the Paris Agreement warming target of 1.5 degrees Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius remains in reach, finding that planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions must fall by 42% by 2030 to hold warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Even in the most optimistic emissions scenario, the chance of now limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is just 14%, adding to a growing body of scientific evidence suggesting the goal is dead.
What we really show every year is where are we headed in terms of global greenhouse gas emissions if countries do what they promise, and where should we be headed if we want to have a likely chance of limiting global warming to the goal of the Paris Agreement, which is to limit temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius throughout the century and preferably to 1.5 degrees. So the report shows the discrepancy between where we're headed with current pledges, current promises by countries, and where we should be headed. And again, this year, the report finds, unfortunately, that there is a large gap, emissions gap, between where country pledges are taking us and where we should be heading. And that is basically unchanged compared with last year's report. So not a lot has happened in terms of strengthening country pledges vis-a-vis what is needed from a scientific side.
Global greenhouse gas emissions rose by 1.2 degrees Celsius from 2021 to 2022, reaching a record 57.4 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Global warming is mainly caused by the greenhouse gas emissions released through burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil and gas. In 1850, carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere were at about 288 parts per million, but that has grown to 422 parts per million today due to industrialization.
We do see that things have changed, however, and one of the promising signs is that if we compare also with the time at which the Paris Agreement was adopted back in 2015, then we see that current policies or policies currently in place are being implemented more strongly, so that the projections in terms of what emission levels we would be looking at globally in 2030, back at the time when the Paris Agreement was adopted, were way higher than what they are now. And that shows us that implementation of policies is taking place. It is helping. It's just not going far enough and deep enough, so to speak. Based on what countries are doing right now, if they continue the current efforts of climate mitigation, then we're looking at limiting temperature increase to 3 degrees throughout this century. With the climate promises for 2030, we're looking at an increase of between 2.5 and 2.9 degrees Celsius. So that's massive global warming and a lot or way beyond the Paris Agreement goal.
Average global temperature has increased with carbon dioxide concentration and is now 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This year is on track to be the hottest ever recorded. To keep to the 2 degrees Celsius Paris Agreement goal, predicted emissions from greenhouse gases like methane, carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide, more commonly known as laughing gas, would need to fall by 28%. The report assessed countries' nationally determined contributions, which they are required to update every 5 years, to determine how much the world might warm if these plans were fully implemented. It compares unconditional pledges, promises with no strings attached, which will lead to a 2.9 degrees Celsius temperature rise, to conditional pledges that will hold the warming to 2.5 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, so this year has been a year of broken records, hence the name of the report this year as well, in terms of temperature records and in terms of extreme events. So we're already seeing worrying signs in terms of the escalation of extreme weather events caused by climate change around the world. If we don't step up, that's going to be far worse in the future, of course. We will see maybe 10 times as many extreme weather events in terms of extreme temperatures. We will see more heavy precipitation. And of course, there are lots of damages following, such as wildfires and so forth.
The anticipated level of warming is slightly higher than 2022 projections, which then pointed towards a rise of between 2.4 degrees Celsius and 2.6 degrees Celsius by 2100. Because the 2023 report ran simulations on more climate models, pledges to reach net zero are not considered credible, with none of the G20 countries cutting emissions quickly enough to meet those targets.
And what's important to remember is also that these are average temperature increases, and they will be very different in different parts of the world. So 2.9 degrees of global warming could be more than 6 degrees of global warming in parts of Africa, for instance. So we're also risking that large parts of the world might become uninhabitable, basically, and that livelihoods of people will be destroyed in addition to lives being lost.
As of 25th of September, 9 countries had submitted new or updated NDCs since the 27th editions of the Conference of the Party to Climate Change Conference in 2022, bringing the total number of updated NDCs to 149. If all new and updated unconditional nationally determined contributions are fully implemented, they would likely reduce greenhouse gas emissions by about 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, about 9% of 2022 emissions, annually by 2030, compared with the initial NDCs.
Governments can't keep pledging to cut emissions under the Paris Agreement and then green-lighting huge fossil fuel projects. This is throwing the global energy transition and humanity's future into question. The longer we wait, the harder it's going to be. The world needs to lift the needle out of the groove of insufficient action and begin setting new records on cutting emissions, on green and just transition, and on climate finance, starting now.
However, unless emissions levels in 2030 are brought down further, it will become impossible to establish least cost pathways that limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius with no or low overshoot during this century. Significantly ramping up implementation in this decade is the only way to avoid significant overshoot of 1.5 degrees Celsius.
The report shows that the emissions gap is more like an emissions canyon. A canyon littered with broken promises, broken lives, and broken records. All of this is a failure of leadership, a betrayal of the vulnerable, and a massive missed opportunity. Leaders must drastically up their game now, with record ambition, record action, and record emissions reductions. The next round of national climate plans will be pivotal. These plans must be backed with the finance, technology, support, and partnerships to make them possible. The task of leaders at COP28 is to make sure that happens.
The first global stocktake, concluding at COP28, will inform the next round of the NDCs that countries should submit in 2025, with targets for 2035. Global ambition in the next round of NDCs must bring greenhouse gas emissions in 2035 to levels consistent with 2 degrees Celsius and 1.5 degrees Celsius pathways, while compensating for excess emissions until levels consistent with these pathways are achieved.
In their response to the global stocktake, countries must commit to triple renewables capacity, double energy efficiency, and bring clean power to all by 2030. And they must also commit to phasing out fossil fuels with a clear time frame aligned to the 1.5 degree limit. Otherwise, we're simply inflating the lifeboats while breaking the horse.
The new emissions gap report finds that delaying greenhouse gas emissions reductions will increase future reliance on carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide removal is already being deployed, mainly through afforestation, reforestation, and forest management. Current direct removals through land-based methods are estimated at 2 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent annually. However, least cost pathways assumed considerable increases in both conventional and novel carbon dioxide removal, such as direct air carbon capture and storage. The most common form of carbon capture collects the gas from a point source, such as a power plant. The carbon dioxide can then be moved to permanent underground storage, or, more commonly, it's used for another industrial purpose first. Currently, most of the carbon dioxide captured this way is injected into oil wells to free trapped oil. Drillers say this enhanced oil recovery method can make petroleum more climate-friendly, but environmentalists say it's counterproductive. Industry data shows there are over 40 commercial point source capture projects operating around the world, with a capacity to store 49 million metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. That's about 0.13% of the world's annual energy and industry-related carbon dioxide emissions. Another form of the technology is direct air capture, with some companies trying more creative solutions, like this one using ballooning to capture the gas in high altitudes. Data from the International Energy Agency shows that only 27 direct air capture hubs have been commissioned globally, capturing just 10,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide a year. But some 130 facilities are planned around the world, with the United States announcing in August $1.2 billion in grants for 2 in Texas and Louisiana. One key challenge is the tax high cost. The price tag for point source capture projects range from $15 to $120 per metric tons of captured carbon. With direct air capture, it can cost up to $1,000 per metric ton. Some countries are trying to use public subsidies to get the projects going, such as the United States Inflation Reduction Act, passed in 2022, that offers tax credits for every ton captured. The cost is a tough sell when there is little proof to show the technology is ready to be deployed at scale. But the developers of the tech say funding is crucial to push it further.
2 years ago, we were at a petri dish where we were removing grams of CO2 from the air. In 2 years, we went from grams to kilograms to hundreds of kilograms to tons to, soon hundreds of tons.
Where captured carbon can be stored is limited by geography, and getting the carbon to storage sites will require extensive pipeline networks or even shipping fleets, posing potential new obstacles.
The jury is out on whether or not you're going to be able to capture enough emissions and contain them and get the permissions you need to deploy the infrastructure and all the other things. Will it be competitive? Will it come online in time?
At the moment, countries are divided between those demanding a deal to phase out planet-warming fossil fuels and nations that say coal, oil and natural gas have a continued role combined with technology to capture their emissions. COP28 is scheduled to take place between November 30th and December 12th. Developed countries, including the United States, Britain, Canada and Japan, are targeting net zero by 2050. China has committed to net zero by 2060, while India has committed to reaching that goal by 2070. Net zero or carbon neutrality means the amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere through any activity is offset by an additional activity to remove an equivalent amount. COP28 discussions are taking place at a time when extreme weather-related events have led to heat waves and erratic monsoons, and scientists have called for immediate actions.
Climate change is not only a temperature issue, but it's wider change in our behavior of atmosphere, and we have already seen practically the whole planet has seen an increase of heat waves. About half of the planet has been facing an increase of flooding events, and 1/3 of the planet has been facing an increase of drought events, and this negative trend will continue until 2060s.
At the Sidi El Barak Dam in Nafza, 140 kilometers west of the capital, Tunis, the dry ground behind the dam is cracked, with trees slowly dying, the result of another failure of rainfall. Empty dams across the fertile northern hills and eastern plains are alarming farmers who produce crops of olives and wheat that once made Tunisia the breadbasket to the ancient world. Olive oil is still the country's most important export. In the rural region of Siliana, farmer Hatem Nafrudi was filling his tanker truck with water from a depleted dam, confusion and gloom on his face.
We're not used to dealing with the problems which we have been facing this winter season. And during the last one, the idea of watering trees in the winter, this was an impossible thing to happen. But now we're in January, and I've watered my plants for the 4th time because the autumn season was dry, and the olive trees did not produce anything. I'm trying to water the trees as much as I can, the olives and almonds, but everything is dry.
Tunisia already has food supply problems thanks to high global prices and the government's own financial difficulties, which have reduced its capacity to buy imported food and subsidize farms at home.
In 1992, I'm 30 years old, and I've never witnessed anything like this yet. If I wanted to express my feelings, I would cry because of the lack of rain, as my livelihood depends on it.
The drought has pushed up further prices, contributing to a crisis for Tunisia's dairy industry, as farmers sell off herds they can no longer afford to keep, leaving supermarket shelves empty of milk and butter. As the country tries to prioritize grain staples and export crops, it has urged farmers to stop irrigating vegetable fields with water from dams. In a further urgent measure, authorities have also, in some cases, limited supply to farms to make sure there will be enough drinking water for homes and businesses. As it wrestles with both its own fiscal problems and the need to reduce any excessive consumption, the government has raised water prices on a sliding scale, with bigger increases for the heaviest users and wealthiest economic sectors. All those measures have pushed up vegetable prices, adding to inflation of over 10% that is driving public anger. That's our show for the week. Thank you for watching our inbox Earthfile at channelcv.com. It's available for all your comments and questions. From all of us here in Lagos, it's bye for now.